This is a re-recording of a testimony that I gave at a Friendship Cafe. Unfortunately, there were some recording hiccups at the time, so we have recorded it again at home, but we're doing it as much word for word as we can for what actually happened. Good morning, ladies. Thank you for this opportunity to share a little of my story with you. I am the eldest of 5 sisters. Some of you know my parents, Malcolm and Leonie Jarrett, and sister Demelza Jarrett, and I'm sure you all know Tamsin Short, who is one of my younger sisters. Our younger sister lives in America, and we have a sister living on the Isle of Wight. I am and have always been single, and despite my physical limitations, I live alone for now. Although I look about 12 in my passport photo, I actually turned 40 near the beginning of this year. This was a special milestone for me, a goal to reach that often seemed impossible. There were many times I didn't think I'd make it to 20, never mind 40, but more of that in a minute. Having been born into a home with Christian parents, I was blessed enough to be introduced to God at an early age. In fact, I was 5 years old when a baptism at our small church piqued my rampant curiosity, and I cornered my mother in our kitchen and asked what must have seemed like an endless list of why questions. For every answer she gave me, I had at least one, if not more, whys to follow, and I'm sure it would have driven her crazy had it been a different subject. I wanted to know why this teenage boy that I knew from church had allowed himself to be pushed under the water in front of everyone. By the end of that conversation, I understood enough of the gospel, of the good news, to know that I wanted this Jesus in my life. I did not know all the theology, nor did I have a wide understanding of all the implications, etc. I'm grateful he met me so young, as I'm sure that older I would have let these things, and others, get in the way. I could so easily have become an intellectual cynic, trusting in myself and my intelligence to fix everything. However, at the age of 5, my understanding was much clearer and unencumbered, and I reasoned this. If Jesus loves me enough to die a horrible death on the cross so that my punishment is taken away, then he must love me immensely. And not only that, but he must want what is good for me. I understood that he would not go to the cross for me and then abandon me somewhere down the line, so I recognised that following him was my safest and best bet. I have not always understood his plan for my life, but he has sustained me through good times and terrible times, and without his faithfulness, I know I would not have made it this far. My 5-year-old logic that God's love meant following him was the best and the safest option has been proven true many times over, and is still true today. It is obvious from the quickest of glances at me that I have serious health issues, and these started as young as 6 months old. I was diagnosed with what was then labelled spastic colon. At that age, and not only did my bowel not work as it should any longer, but my immunity was also somewhat suspect. I didn't have severe immune deficiency, but I was prone to get every childhood illness going, and would sometimes have more than one at a time. I was greedy like that. I managed to get whooping cough despite having had the vaccination against it. We didn't know it yet, but I had the beginnings of this disease, and although we cannot go back in time to conclusively confirm the causation, we strongly believe it was linked to the polio vaccination of the time. Back in the early 70s, polio vaccination was still relatively young, and they used live virus, and while cases of polio dropped dramatically, cases of a variant severe neurological illness, sometimes called atypical polio by researchers and doctors at the time, skyrocketed. At the age of 6, when I had the booster vaccination, still not knowing the danger to me, the beginning of this disease took hold. My muscles would let me walk, although my joints began to give way, but I went from being the fastest kid in class to the slowest in races, something that frightened me as much as it upset me, because I didn't understand. I was consoled that it was temporary because of recent illness, but it wasn't. And I soon forgot that I had ever been any good at sport, although I never lost the confusion when I ran. Something wasn't right, my muscles were not responding as they should, but I didn't know what that meant. Within a year, I began seeing different specialists for different symptoms that were appearing each year throughout my remaining childhood, and I had turned from an outgoing, sporting child to a sickly mouse. Just a month before my 15th birthday, I developed what was thought to be glandular fever, but was more likely the virus causing my illness taking a firm hold, one of a number from the same family as polio. Polio itself was caused by up to 5 or even 6 different viruses from the same group, and the same is almost certainly true with this disease. From that point I began to go downhill much quicker, with a constant severe headache, and developed symptoms across every system of the body, until just over 2 years later, despite having seen every specialist possible in both conventional and alternative medicine, I collapsed and became bedbound, with episodes of complete paralysis from the age of 17. This is one of, if not the most misunderstood and mistreated diseases, and a lot of abusive situations took place in those early years that I'm not going to take time to go into this morning, except to say that without the direct input of my faithful God, I would not have made it through that time. Trying to make a very long story as quick as possible, we became aware through another severely affected woman of a treatment protocol being used in South Africa, with some success, and as a result I was tested for chronic rickettsial infection, found positive and treated with high-dose antibiotics intermittently over the following years. It took a while before there was any significant change, but then I improved relatively quickly, so that after about 18 months, and just before my 21st birthday, I was walking again with crutches. Stable for about 9 years, though never even close to being well, I moved away from home in September 2001 and took on self-employment with both radio work, having early qualified with a postgrad diploma in broadcast journalism, and working for Christian education in Europe, followed by the NHS. However, a year later, and I was going downhill, and on May 18th, 2003, collapsed completely again. Since then it has become more progressive, with fairly lengthy hospital stays when I first stopped tolerating food properly in about 2006, and then in 2010 when my breathing became too weak. The latter stay led to me coming here to Hampshire, when I wasn't allowed to return to the home I had been admitted from. Some things I lose the ability to do gradually, and others, maybe most things, more suddenly in each subsequent collapse. By the most recent one, back in April time of this year, I could do nothing. Raising my head off the pillow was not only very difficult, but led to strong nausea. I could eat nothing at all. The pain level was uncontrolled, despite 100 milligrams of morphine every 12 hours, amongst other meds, and I was not able to stay awake much at all. It is only thanks to God's provision of what has proved to be a controversial steroid treatment that I am able to function again, and it is not far short of miraculous that I am able to be here this morning, never mind do what I'm doing right now. My time, like all of ours, is limited, and this treatment is not a good longer-term option. But death doesn't scare me. That is when I have guaranteed healing, if he doesn't choose to heal before then. My situation is a blessing, though far from easy, for many reasons, and one of them is the daily awareness that time is short, and to make the most of now. Not one of us is guaranteed tomorrow. If today was my last day, then I would still be here, and be glad for this opportunity. What about you? Are you secure in what happens after death? And whether God will say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," or "Get away from me, I never knew you"? Are your days filled more with busyness than with what will matter to you on that last day? Modern life is so busy that it is so easy to miss the point of each day. As a Christian, it is my role to bring him glory in everything I do, and not just what I do, but also to enjoy him and getting to know him just by being with him. I'm far too much of a human doing than a human being, and God in his sovereignty has stripped back everything I thought I could do to reveal how helpless I truly am without him. That is a painful, sometimes excruciating experience, but it is so much worth it when I learn to trust him, because I know him more. The more my life becomes about him, and not about me, the more content I have become, despite outward circumstances. There are so many stories I could share with you this morning. So many times God has taken me to the edge, and even let me free fall over that edge, believing that I can't cope another moment and doubting his promise in 1 Corinthians 10:13, where he says that no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. I believed it was beyond my ability, and that I went from hanging on by my fingernails to falling into an abyss. But just at that final moment, there was a tug on my ankle, and then I became aware of the bungee cord that was about to shoot me straight back up again. I was going to say shoot me back up into his arms, but the analogy fails there because he never let me out of the safety of his arms in the first place, no matter what it felt like to me at the time. Time doesn't allow for me to tell these stories this morning, but I did want to focus on two things. Two things that, as I've come to understand them more and believe them more, I have been able to learn contentment. I did not always have this peace. If you had met me in my late teens, you'd have met a very messed up and confused person who was seriously depressed. In fact, depression has been an almost constant companion for most of my life, with my first experience at the age of 12. I have used self-harm and fantasy and any other coping mechanism I could latch onto in order to survive depressive episodes that lasted months at the most severe and almost constant at a slightly lesser degree. I was regularly very suicidal and even became catatonic at one stage, where I could not live, but by the grace of God could not bring myself to go through with death either. It's about 8 years now since the last time I was in such a bad way, and previously I'd be close to that for at least a few weeks a year, usually when I had an infection. My depression is biologically induced, so I cannot prevent that. It's part of the disease, but I can choose how I respond to it. My coping mechanisms of the past would get me through the night to start with, but would spiral the depression fast. Now I have learned to take the pain to him in a practical way, and spiritual issues that would complicate the situation have been dealt with in a way that I also learned how to tackle spiritual issues that arise in times to come. I don't want to give the wrong impression this was an overnight or easy change, but it is a change I never believed possible before, and it is largely based on how much I can truly trust God. Do I believe, truly believe, he is sovereign, that he is in control, and can limit what happens to that which I can cope with if I turn to him and rely on his supply of strength and not my own? My own will always fail. Do I believe, truly believe that he is good? That he will always be looking out for my best interests, as my 5-year-old self reasoned when choosing to follow him in the first place? Do I really trust him, or just say that I do because I know that I should be? When I am given notice to leave my flat at what seems the worst possible moment, do I believe he is in control of that? Surely he would have waited until I was better able to cope with the move, and until I had the right help. I had 2 months' notice, and my parents had left barely a week before for 2.5 months with my younger sister in America, and on their return would be occupied with another sister who was getting married. I had other things going on, including an incredible opportunity to carry the Olympic torch, and visitors coming that meant there was no way I could find somewhere suitable for my specific physical needs within the time. Why would God do that if he is in control of it? His timing is perfect, and he wants what's best for me. Why would he give me something I couldn't cope with? When my landlady heard about the genuine reasons I couldn't move within the deadline given, she was moved with compassion to not only give me the extension to October I had requested, but said she would not take me to court until after January 5th. It had been June when the original lightning bolt of the notice letter had arrived. I had not expected the notice, having thought I would stay there until somewhere more suitable for longer term was found. So instead of having 2 months to find somewhere to adjust to the idea of moving, to start packing up and organising the flat with the help of a carer, and despite my severe limitations, instead of 2 months, I had up to 6 months. I had the extra time exactly because of the timing of the notice. God did know what he was doing. Although we believe vaccination was the method by which my body became overwhelmed by this disease, you may be surprised to learn I'm not anti-vaccination, and neither am I bitter or question why me about that. I never went down the route of why me for several reasons, including why should it not be me? I never thought that I should be exempt while others suffered instead. I also blamed myself a lot for reasons connected with the abuses, so I'm not going to expound on that at this time. But I also never thought that way because I knew that God was sovereign over what had happened. If my body was that vulnerable to this type of virus, then I would have been equally vulnerable to polio itself. So without vaccination and the near eradication of polio, I would likely have been one of those children who died from that, or was badly damaged from it. But most of all, whatever the might have beens and the might nots, God is sovereign over this disease affecting my life the way it has. It was his choice. At first glance, that may seem to then negate the second point. After all, how could God choose a life of suffering for someone he loves if he is good? That's a massive question. And I'm about out of time. So all I can say for right now is that while I have found life very hard, and at times, especially with the depression, all but unbearable, I have also gained so much, precisely because of the way my life has gone. I wanted to be a doctor when I was a teenager, and was in the process of working towards A-levels and looking at med school prospectuses, when I had my first major collapse at 17 and ended up in bed for those 4 years. I grieved the loss of those years and the opportunities I thought I'd lost, even the person I thought I would be. Instead, once back on my feet with those crutches, I got to work almost full-time for the church. I have had opportunities to speak to men in prison about who God really is and his love and forgiveness, his grace and mercy on offer to us because of what Jesus suffered. More recently, in a complete circle, he has brought me back to my first love and given me the opportunity to learn biblical counselling, and I became the first woman, first person to complete while living in England, and second overall English graduate to be fully certified in this type of counselling. I wanted to work with healing of the body, something that is very limited and at best temporary, and instead I get to work with healing of souls, something that can change a life like nothing else and last for eternity. How cool is that? My health limits how much counselling I can do these days, and I don't understand God's purpose in that. But I know he has one. If I could understand everything God was doing, I wouldn't think much of him. He is beyond my understanding, and his ways beyond my ways, and I am grateful for that. Not understanding why does not mean I can't still know the truth that he is sovereign over that situation, whatever it is, and that he is good in that situation, however big or small. That is what I bring everything back to these days, whenever I find something hard to deal with. Is God good? Is God in control? Then I can trust him to work his purposes out, and that it will ultimately be for my good and his glory. My understanding all the way through is not required. There is so much I wish I could go on to say, to talk about wrestling with fear, or what I learned about self-esteem, for example, but you normal people will want lunch sometime, preferably before midnight, and I want to end with something way outside my comfort zone. Not that public speaking was exactly inside it. I have been songwriting since I was about 14. It has been an invaluable way for me to express pain, as well as to pray and to praise. Each song reflects my heart at the time in some way. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to finish with a song I wrote in November of 2011, shortly after I returned from America. It has ties to an earlier song written following the tragedy experienced by Stephen Curtis Chapman and his family. For those who don't know him or the story, he's a Christian contemporary singer-songwriter who has been extremely successful over many years. On May 22nd, 2008, his youngest adopted daughter was run over and killed in their driveway by one of his teenage sons. My heart broke for them, and in particular the son involved, and I wrote about how everything can change in a moment. It wasn't one of my best songs. When I returned from America that time, I almost completely lost the use of both arms for about 3 weeks. It wasn't complete paralysis, but not far short, and I didn't know if it would progress to complete or not. I was used to having trouble using my left arm, but had been able to rely on my right one since I was a teenager. Even if it recovered, which it did, I realized this was the beginning of a process where I could lose it for good. There is little more vulnerable than lying in bed alone and not being able to move. At that point, everything truly is stripped back, and the truth of who we are is revealed. We can hide behind routine, behind busyness, but in moments like that, we find out the truth. And that's a mercy, when we can use that experience to grow. Sometimes it's our own bad choices that can turn our lives upside down in an instant, and even though we may be forgiven, there can be difficult consequences that will still remain. Mostly though, I hope the song will reinforce that God is sovereign, whatever happens in our lives, that He is good, and that because of those two things, we can trust Him completely. We can trust Him with our worst fears. We can trust Him with our daily worries. We can trust Him with the life-changing tragedy. And we can trust Him with the many little things each day that we tend to keep to ourselves instead. Sometimes, if not often, it can actually be easier to trust Him with the big things, those things we know we can't cope with without Him. But we find it harder to trust Him with the smaller things. He is good. He is sovereign. And He can be trusted with all of our lives. Thank you for listening. By the way, I should mention before I start, I am not a good singer. I do not have the beautiful voice Tamsin has. Even before the muscle weakness and breathing limitations, I didn't have a good voice. And I have no idea how much voice I have left today. So please, don't listen to me, but listen to the song. And as no one else knows the song, it just happens to be me that will be singing it. It only takes a moment for everything to change. Sometimes it is good news, sometimes the blessing's hidden from view. It only takes a moment for the lightning bolt to strike, leaving my heart in ashes, scattered in the night. But when all is stripped away, I find out what's really true, who I really am and what my heart's in bondage to. When the darkness of the night feels like more than I can bear, I am not alone, my faithful Saviour's always there. And when the light of dawn breaks through with the start of a brand new day, I find that I have gained far more than was ever stripped away. By the grace of God, I've gained far more than was ever stripped away. It only takes a moment to make that unwise choice. I can be forgiven, but sometimes the consequences still last. It only takes a moment, but God is not surprised. He is sovereign over all the lightning in our lives. And when all is stripped away, I find out what's really true. Who I really am and what my heart's in bondage to. When the darkness of the night feels like more than I can bear, I am not alone, my faithful Saviour's always there. And when the light of dawn breaks through with the start of a brand new day, I find that I have gained far more than was ever stripped away. By the grace of God I've gained far more than was ever stripped away. He never takes more than he gives back in return. He never leaves us in the cold to cope alone. He has a purpose for each moment we live through, and it is good. He is good. He never takes more than he gives back in return. He never leaves us in the cold to cope alone. He has a purpose for each moment we live through, and it is good. He is good. And when all is stripped away, I find out what's really true. Who I really am and what my heart's in bondage to. When the darkness of the night feels like more than I can bear, I am not alone, my faithful Saviour's always there. And when the light of dawn breaks through with the start of a brand new day, I find that I have gained far more than was ever stripped away. By the grace of God